This is going to begin chapter 14, which is the brain and the cranial nerves. In this video, we're just going to be looking at introduction to this chapter, and then also looking at the types of protection the central nervous system has. So the purpose of this chapter is pretty much just looking at the central nervous system as a whole. We're going to look at how the brain is organized, how it's protected, and where we get our blood supply from. We're going to look at the different parts of the brain and look at their functions. Look at how the brain is organized, and then also talk about the cranial nerves. So the adult brain consists of four major parts. We have the brainstem, the cerebellum, the diencephalon, and the cerebrum. So there's going to be the four main parts of the brain. So the brain stem, this is continuous with the spinal cord. So we're going to start at approximately here, and it contains all this area and about right here and all that area. So, and it consists of the medulla oblongata, which is this bottom part here, and we also have the pons, which is kind of this larger area here, this area here, and then it also includes the midbrain, more of this upper area there. Now, posterior to the brainstem is the cerebellum. So cerebellum is this big part of the brain here. Then superior to the brainstem, we have the diencephalon. The diencephalon is pretty much, in general, is going to be that area. And this consists of the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. Supported on the diencephalon and the brainstem, we have the cerebrum. And this is the largest part of the brain. Pretty much this large part of the brain when we think of the brain itself. So the brain has a couple things that in combination are all going to work to protect it. So first off, we have the cranium that protects it, the cranial meninges. These also surround and protect the brain, and the cerebral spinal fluid protects the brain as well. So we've already talked about the cranial bones. We looked at those when we looked at the skeletal system. The other two we haven't really talked about yet, and we're going to talk about those in this chapter. So first off, the cranial meninges. These are continuous with the spinal meninges. So when we talked about the spinal cord in the last chapter, those three layers of the connective tissue protecting the spinal cord, it's continuous. It goes straight up into the brain too. And these have the same basic structure and they bear the same names as the spinal meninges. So we have the outer dura mater, the middle arachnoid mater, and the inner pia mater. However, one difference that we do see with the brain as opposed to the spinal cord is that the cranial dura mater is actually composed of two layers in the brain, where in the spinal dura mater it only has one. The cerebral spinal fluid is created by parts of the brain and acts as a kind of cushion to protect the brain as well. And we will talk about CSF later on in the lecture. The two layers of the cranial dural matter are the periosteal layer, which is the external or more superficial layer here, of the dura mater. And then the inner layer is the meningeal layer. And this is going to be this layer that's a little bit deeper. As you can see here, this deeper one. Right here. Now the dural layers around the brain are fused together, except in these spaces where they separate to enclose dural venous sinuses. And these dural venous sinuses, you can kind of think of them as collecting pools of blood where they will actually collect the blood for the central nervous system, and they will drain the venous blood and deliver it into the internal jugular veins. So the superior sagittal sinus is one example of these dural venous sinuses. And again, these are actually endothelial lined venous channels that will drain venous blood from around the brain and also around the face as well, and delivers it to the internal jugular veins. So one important thing to note is that there's no epidural space around the brain. Blood vessels that enter the brain tissue pass along the sheathed, loose-fitting sleeve of the pia mater. We do have 3 extensions of the dura mater that separate parts of the brain. The first one is the falx cerebri. And this actually separates the 2 hemispheres of the cerebrum. The prefix falx actually stands for sickle-shaped. So kind of the shape of like a crescent moon kind of shape. That would be kind of a sickle shape. The second dura mater extension would be the falx cerebelli, and this actually separates the left and right hemispheres of the cerebellum. And then the third dura mater extension is the tentorium cerebelli, and this separates the cerebrum from the cerebellum. And that's going to be the end of chapter 14, part 1.